Welcome to the Sourcing Industry Landscape Podcast, powered by SIG.org and hosted by Tiura.
Well, folks, welcome back to the podcast series. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Larry Flusser from ProcureAbility. And we're going to go through a little background about Larry. And so let me just tell you about him. So Larry, welcome to the studio.
Thanks very much.
So Larry's title is Advisory Manager at ProcureAbility, and he's an accomplished procurement professional with more than 20 years of strategic consulting experience. Now, he started in New York in the book publishing production and has since ventured into his current focus areas, which include procurement technology, managed services, and independent consulting. He also has a very diverse client portfolio spanning manufacturing, private equity, retail, FMCG, which is fast-moving consumer goods, automotive, financial services, and utilities. Larry brings a wealth of expertise to the table. I'm really excited to talk to him. He also carries a BA in English literature, a minor in writing from University of Pittsburgh, which has got to go it's got to be handy to have that when you're a consultant. So Larry, I want people to get to know you, and I have quite a few questions for you myself. But first, we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor.
Sourcing Industry Group, or SIG, is the premier global sourcing association and is widely known as a forum for providing thought leadership, networking, and training opportunities. Another central element of SIG is training. SIG is the parent organization for SIG University, which was founded on the ideals of elevating sourcing and risk professionals to deliver strategic value to their organizations and transform their careers. It was created at the request of SIG members who saw an educational training gap for today's workforce, and offers one-of-a-kind certification and training programs for professionals seeking deep expertise in sourcing, governance, risk, intelligent automation, and more for themselves and for their teams. We perfected e-learning for adults before it was necessary. Our proven model for adult learners provides a flexible environment with online lessons, quizzes, and discussion forums moderated by expert faculty. Programs are offered in several different delivery models depending on you or your organization's need. Open cohort semesters start on average every 1.5 months, while closed cohorts for teams of 20 or more can start at any time. In addition, we also have self-paced or fast-track options. You can learn more about all of these offerings on the SIG website or by reaching out to one of our representatives. So make sure to take advantage of all that SIG has to offer for both members and non-members alike, because there really is something for everyone.
Well, welcome back. So I know, Larry, you talk a lot about creativity in procurement. So can you just maybe tell me, how is creativity typically perceived within procurement, and why is it crucial not to underestimate its significance for procurement professionals today? Can you share something on that?
Sure. So typically, when I think about creativity and procurement, they don't necessarily go together in the same sentence. I think among procurement teams, and the procurement function, creativity can be thought of as somewhat problematic at times, right? Not necessarily focused on cost, not necessarily focused on feasibility of production, not necessarily focused on meeting timelines, right? And those are some of the key objectives that a procurement team and a procurement function tries to meet, which are to keep all those things in line. So typically, creativity among procurement teams can actually see somewhat of opposing forces. That being said, I think that creativity is a really big part of what procurement function really needs to bring to the table to develop great solutions for our clients. So we may not always call it creativity, because in some circles, creativity may not have that traditional reputation and how perception that we talked about. It's a really key point and element to bring for creative procurement professionals to bring into their function.
It makes sense, because back in the early days before sourcing, when it was really just buying, you were told what to buy. It didn't take any creativity. They told you who to buy it from and how much. And typically all you got to do is negotiate on the actual price. But today's procurement professional, we're looking for someone who's so much, I would say, better rounded. They have to have all kinds of skill sets that didn't exist within a old-fashioned purchasing organization, but certainly have to be in today's procurement professional. But can you tell me, what are some of the positive examples of applying creativity? Is it during the sourcing process? Is it in finding the suppliers? Is it looking at adaptations to your specifications, where would you say that you apply it and get the best benefits?
Yeah, all of the above, I would say, Dawn. So applying creativity can be across the procurement function. So you mentioned supplier relationship management. So there are ways to revisit and bring some new solutions to how procurement teams negotiate with their suppliers, and also enhance the supplier relationship function. Right? It's not just about messaging and communication. There can be some expansion there. One of the examples that comes to mind, we're always looking for cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the projects that I worked on a few years ago was all about cost savings. And it was really focused on the material cost, the manufacturing costs. And as we know, as procurement professionals, we would apply the typical levers such as benchmarks for materials, benchmarks for labor. But in this particular case, it took some creativity to look and actually expand the scope and look at some of the work functions that were prior to the manufacturing. And actually, that's where the cost was in this particular example. So it took some creativity. It took a little bit of a departure from the usual focus in procurement to expand the scope, look at that part of the cost of the service, and then that's where the cost savings was. So I think there are a number of different ways, and creativity can be applied to the procurement function to achieve some really great results.
So when you're introducing the term, we need to be more creative to your team members, do you use the word creative, or do you use, think outside the box? I mean, how do you actually get it so that people understand the type of creativity that you're discussing?
So it really depends on the situation. As part of an advisory, so I mentioned I'm working with utilities right now. We definitely apply creativity into the work that we're doing there. In this particular case, the creativity is in the mechanics of some of the pricing techniques and methods that we're using, but we don't necessarily call it that, right? So in a utility environment, it's heavily regulated. There's a lot of compliance that needs to be respected. So we don't necessarily have it travel under the word of we're being creative. But at the same time, we're applying some creativity and revisiting some of the ways that pricing is calculated and negotiated and eventually contracted. So I think we encourage teams to answer your question specifically. We love for people to think outside the box. And at ProcureAbility, we have a charter for us to revisit and come up with great solutions for our clients. That often mean revisiting how we are some of our practices and bringing new thinking.
I like that. So when you talk about creativity, and let's say I've got an existing supplier relationship and I've been working with them for a number of years and we're getting maybe to contract renewal. If I have not introduced this concept of we need to be creative with an existing supplier, are they apt to be open to it? Or do they just want to keep on doing business the way they've always been doing it? How can I work with existing suppliers?
So, I think suppliers are actually a big contributor, I think, to applying creativity and procurement. Part of the relationship with suppliers, especially in manufacturing and some of the experiences in the past, is that we actually need to co-develop some new ideas with our contractors, right? They are the ones who are delivering the work. So I think the idea is to, when it comes to working with contractors, to give them that same expectation and say, look, we're also challenged by our management, we're challenged by our clients to come up with new solutions. And ultimately, because you, contractor, are the one who are a supplier that are delivering the work, we're going to engage and ask you to bring some new ideas to the table, bring some new processes and efficiencies, because we're all looking to evolve. And I think that is a welcome opportunity where suppliers are looking to be engaged and part of the process.
I like that. So do you have any resources that I could recommend to folks to look up or to read about how to introduce creativity?
Yes. So at ProcureAbility, we are blogging on this topic right now. And I
Okay.
think, again, big part of the engaging productivity is asking the population, asking the people who have worked projects for ideas. So I would refer to our blog, where we have various consultants within the company. They're telling their stories about how applying creativity has worked out so well.
Well, good. Do you mind if we put a link to the blog with this podcast when we put it out there?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. So if I'm talking to a procurement professional and I want to make sure that they're putting creativity in the work, do you have a checklist? Is there a way that I could go out and say, you've got to think about it at this point in the process, this point in the process, this point? Is it something that I can actually say, let's boil it down and say at the end of the day, were we creative? How many boxes could we check? Or does creativity have to be more organic?
Yeah, I think there is certainly a method that I would recommend applying. I think from a procurement professional and procurement leadership, I think there needs to be some strong messaging that encourages for people to come forward with ideas, but also apply that advisory element. Creativity is not always necessarily a great fit or great messaging in all situations, like the example I mentioned. So I think that starts with number one is giving that charter and giving that reinforcement of encouragement for creativity to be applied. Also, again, in a particular situation, it might be that the supplier element really has the most room to apply creativity. It could be some of the mechanics of pricing and negotiation where it applies. So I think it is encouraged, but also to be used with, obviously an advisory element and some judgment. One other thing I would also encourage is, as organizations grow, that in the recruiting function that we look for people that actually have some experience, surely in procurement acumen and all the things that we know very well, but also have some experience working with creative teams and understanding how ideas are introduced into an efficient process.
Interesting. So, back when I was sourcing, I was working, ironically, at a utility, and one of our suppliers came forward with an RFP, and they said that they were going to be using prison labor to do part of their manufacturing process, which I thought was incredibly creative. But saying you're going to use prison labor to a regulated utility, they were so scared of what the regulators might think of introducing this kind of foreign aspect into their workflow. Is that something that you would have poo-pooed and say, no way, while it's creative, it doesn't work? Or is it something you would ask a team to actually be open-minded and explore a little bit further?
Well, I think you do both. I think all ideas should be welcomed and then obviously put through the strong scrutiny. But also, we're always meeting our clients' expectations, correct? So you mentioned the utility space, and I think that as much as we encourage suppliers and contractors to come forward with ideas, there are still strong requirements that need to be put in place, and we can always throw that up and say, "Thank you for the idea, but it's not a great fit. Can you come back with something else? Can we look for another area?" So I think that creativity can be welcomed, but it's not necessarily being creative for the sake of being creative, right?
Right.
We need to come up with, it's all in the goal of coming up with terrific solutions for the end customer.
So how do you work with a team then? Because I can just imagine that somebody's going to have this fantastic idea and they bring it to the table, and the team just rolls their eyes, gives them that look like, are you crazy? Is it important to set that safe environment that like no idea is stupid, everything should be brought forth? Or do you ask people to just, sort of do that check and balance in their head before they even speak up?
Yeah, I would say more of the former, where ideas are welcome, but being procurement professionals, every solution or any product that we put in front of our client needs to be tested by the practices we already know, right? We
Mhm.
need to collect data. We need to collect the requirements and voice of the customer. We need to be able to run and test that data against our requirements around mathematical models and so forth. And then when we come up, it needs to pass that test, right? So it needs to be solid. And we can say, this is actually a creative idea, and we're presenting it to you after we have passed the test of data scrutiny,
Mhm.
validation, requirements gathering, and we've put forth that way an idea that's creative, but also we have confidence in.
So when you're looking at creative ideas, I guess if I were to boil it down for the audience, it could come in, it could show up as a benefit in cost savings. It could show up in quality, delivery, KPIs, hard savings, soft savings. Can it show up almost everywhere?
It really does. I think it applies across the board. And one creative idea in one area can trickle through to the others, right? And
Mhm.
and part of our data and our validation process is measuring, for the best impact, and also meeting what the client's objectives are. Sometimes cost savings are top, sometimes they're not. They're, again, in working with a client now, they're very, very key in improving the relationships that they have with their suppliers, in case sometimes they're public. So they want that to be improved. It's not always about the bottom line, but absolutely, a good idea can find its way into any of the procurement processes we know and make a great impact across the board.
So I'm curious, Larry, what made you want to talk about creativity? How is that you introduced that into procurability and into the practice?
So, my background, as you mentioned earlier, is a little bit unconventional to some of the other procurement professionals. So, I started in a creative industry. So, the trade book publishing business in New York has, creativity is its product, right? We're talking about best-selling authors. We're talking about graphic arts, and it's a very heavily creative industry with the talent, with the editorial staff, as well as the graphic designers. And in that time, I think that traditional view we talked about earlier was held, where there's the people who do the ordering and the buying, and then there's those who own the content. But as things evolved, I became part of more of a collaborative team where we were able to work with our suppliers and bring forward new ideas that let the creative ideas even launch further. So I think that there's a really good harmony that can be achieved between balancing the interests of the creative teams with the discipline of a function such as finance and accounting and procurement. So I think I've seen some examples where the two can fit well.
Uh-huh.
It can make the work even more engaging as a procurement professional. You can solidify relationships with your own teams and ultimately do better work overall. So I think the work that I'm proudest of over the years is the ones are the examples where creativity survived that scrutiny and passed the test and ended up delivering a great result.
So when you first started talking about it at Procurability, did everyone just glom onto it and say, yeah, this is the way to go? Or was it something you had to coach some of your team members with?
It's a really good question. So I think that it always depends on the situation,
Mhm.
right? I think that within procurability is a really strong receptiveness to people coming forward with ideas, right? And I think our charter from our senior leadership team is to deliver great solutions for our clients, right? And sometimes that is what it means, is to come up with a good idea. But again, we're checking those ideas with the procurement processes that we know. They're data driven, they're requirements driven, so there's a strong receptiveness to it. Again, situationally, as being part of an advisory, we may not always call it being creative, but we have to bring that element to the good work we do.
No, I totally get that. I think that's great. So if you have a key takeaway that you want to leave with the audience right now, what would that be?
I would say encourage your teams to come forward with their ideas, right? And to let their working experience know, to test their ideas and be safe in a safe environment with their peers, and also look forward to applying the procurement acumen they already know and combining the two to deliver a great solution for your own customer.
Yeah. And so, today, I talk to people about, what are some of the greatest aspects of a great procurement person today? How would you describe that person? The very number one thing they say is influence. They have to have influence. And almost beyond a doubt, the second one is personality and the ability to have a conversation and sell. And that to me also means creativity has to be part of their vocabulary to make it interesting, to say that, we've looked outside the box. So I think you've hit the nail right on the head. I think that's exactly describes the modern procurement professional. And I'll tell you, it certainly doesn't describe the one that I first met 25 years ago when I started in this industry. It was It was boring, black and white. I mean, so Larry, I don't know if you know, but I'm a bean counter. I'm a recovering CPA. And so I should be sitting there with that green eye shade. And I think procurement people were thought of the same way. You take the orders, you do what you say, what you're told to do, and you just keep your head down and you don't look up and you don't meet me in the eye with any new ideas. And I certainly think that has changed dramatically over these years.
Yes, no, thank you for that observation. I agree. I think that as procurement professionals, introducing creativity and practicing creativity can add to the pride that we have in our work. We can actually see ourselves connected to the end result, whether it's an end product or a great solution. So we may not be in the front light, right, of the front of the stage, but we are there in the background, a key part of delivery. And I think that as the procurement professional modernizes, applying creativity to your solutions, to how you communicate, is a really key part of being successful.
I do too. Well, Larry, it's been so great having you on the podcast, and thank you for spending some time with me today. And folks, reach out, make sure that you keep the conversation going. Reach out to Larry and make sure you reach out to ProcureAbility, and we will remember to put a link to your blog as well. So thank you, Larry, for joining.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Sourcing Industry Landscape podcast through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Want to nominate yourself or someone else for an interview? Email us at podcast@sig.org.